Okay, class, today we're going to talk about multiplying and dividing integers. But first, let's review addition and subtraction. If you remember correctly, to add or subtract integers, we have some rules that we got to follow. If it's an addition problem, we know it's going to be an addition problem because there is a plus in the middle of the problem. And we have two things that we look at if it's addition. If our signs are alike, we're going to add our numbers together and keep the sign of the problem. So positive and positive make a positive, negative and negative make more negatives. But if our signs are different, we're going to subtract our numbers and take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. In other words, the number that's farthest from zero. But if it's subtraction, we're going to use an acronym that you learned last year that says LCO, which stands for leave the first number alone, change subtraction to addition, and the next number to its opposite. Or really, in essence, we're going to change subtraction to addition and the next number to its opposite, and then we go back to our addition rules. Signs alike add, signs different subtract. Well, today we're going to look at multiplication. Okay? So let's start off with a really simple question. And the first thing I have to ask you is, what does 2 times 3 really mean? Back when you did this way back in elementary school, what did it actually mean? Well, what they taught you was that this meant 2 groups of positive 3, or 2 groups of 3. But we're going to look at it in terms of 2 groups of positive 3. So that means really that I've got one group of positive 3, another group of positive 3. What will that give me? That actually gives me positive 6. So a positive times a positive gives me a positive. Okay. Well, what if we increase the level of difficulty a little bit? What if we threw in some negatives? So like this second question says, now granted it's the same question, 2 times 3, but now we've got a negative 3. So if we put it in those same terms, this means 2 groups of negative 3. So if I were to build that, 2 groups of negative 3 means I've got a negative 6. So a positive times a negative gives me a negative 6. Okay? So let's keep moving, keep moving. What if I gave you this problem? What if I put the negative on the 2 instead of the 3? Well, this one really says that I want the opposite of 2 groups of positive 3. Well, what's the opposite of 2 groups of positive 3? 2 groups of negative 3. Okay? So we're still going to get an answer of negative 6. So a negative times a positive gives me a negative. So either way, whether we did a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive, we still ended up with a negative answer. Well, now, what if we ended up with both parts of our problem being negative? Well, this one says I want the opposite of 2 groups of negative 3. Well, the opposite of 2 groups of negative 3 will be 2 groups of positive 3. Okay, so the answer is really going to be a positive 6. So a negative times a negative will actually be a positive. So when we look at the 4 problems that we've done, we did a positive times a positive, gave us a positive. A positive times a negative gave us a negative. A negative times a positive gave us a negative. And a negative times a negative gave us a positive. So what we learned from last year, I'm hoping that you remember, is that really there's 2 things that we do with multiplication. The first thing that we do is just multiply, because 2 times 3 was always 6, no matter what. But then what we do is we look at our integers. We count our integer signs. And if I have 1 negative, my answer is going to be negative. If I have 2 negatives, my answer is going to be positive. And if you kind of think about it, these 2 negatives right here, how many pencil marks does it take to make a positive? 2. Here's the 2 pencil marks. So for multiply, really what you do is this. If your signs are alike, your answer is going to be positive. If your signs are different, your answer is going to be negative. But in my class, we're going to have probably a whole string of numbers, maybe more than 2, 3, 4, 5, 45 numbers that we've got to put together. So if you have more than 2 numbers, what you're going to do is you're just going to multiply your numbers together, and then you're going to count your negative signs. If you have an even number of negative signs, you're going to have a positive answer because there's always going to be a pair. Always going to be a pair. But if you have an odd number of negative signs, your answer is going to be negative because you'll have a pair, but then you may have one left out. This one negative that's left out by itself makes the whole problem negative. So let's see if we can do a couple problems. Here's our first one. First thing we do is multiply. So we take the first problem, 4 times 6 is 24, just like it always has been. Now, how many negatives do we have? We have one negative, so my answer is negative. Okay, next problem. First thing, multiply. 3 times 6 is 18. Times 2 is 36. So we get 36. Now we go back and count our negatives. There's 1, 2, 3. Well, these two go together to make a positive. But then we multiply the positive times the negative, which makes the whole thing negative. So the 3 negatives makes the whole problem negative. Okay. Next problem. 5 times 3 is 15. Times 2 is 30. Times 1 is still 30. We go through and we count our negatives. I have 1 negative. I have 2 negatives. So my answer is positive. So you don't need a sign on that one. Now, some of you may say, well, what about the positives? Well, if you look at your marks on this 5's already got 2 marks. This 2's already got 2 marks. So 2 marks, 2 marks, 2 marks makes it positive. And the last one, the most fun one of all. -1 times -1 times -1 times 1 times -1 times -1 times 1 times -1. Well, I hope you know that all the ones mean it's just 1. But now we go through and we count our negatives. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 negatives makes it positive. And again, you don't have to have the positive. So, for multiplying, all you do is multiply your numbers. And then you come back and you count your signs. If you have an even number of negative signs, your answer is positive. Odd number of negative signs, your answer is negative. Now, what about division? Well, the nice thing about division is it's the same rules. The same exact rules apply. We do one thing different. Instead of multiply, we divide. So in this first problem right here, 25 divided by 5 is 5. I have 1 negative, so my answer is negative. 45 divided by 9 is 5. I have 1 negative, so my answer is negative. 36 divided by 4 is 9. I have 2 negatives, so my answer is positive. Now, in this next problem, we actually have some order of operations. So you actually have to do this part first because it's in parentheses. So 26 plus -4 gives us 22. So now we have 22 divided by -11. So 22 divided by 11 is 2. I have 1 negative, so my answer is negative. And then the last one. Well, this is another way of writing division. So this says 54 divided by 6. So 54 divided by 6 is 9. How many negatives do you see? Just 1. So it's a -9. So for multiply and divide, same rules. Step number 1, multiply or divide. Step number 2, count your negative signs. If you have an even number, it's positive. An odd number, the answer will be negative. And that's how you multiply or divide integers.